Welcome to Tales from the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Mick West. My guest today is Brandon Fugal, a prominent business leader based in Utah and the current owner of the mysterious Skinwalker Ranch, which is the focus of a wide variety of reported strange phenomena, from supernatural visitors to cattle mutilations and UFOs. The ranch is now the subject of a History Channel show, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, the finale for which airs on Tuesday, June the 2nd, this coming Tuesday. So, Brandon, thank you very much for being here.
It's a pleasure to be with you. And what a wonderful way to end our week on a beautiful Friday afternoon.
Well, thank you. It should be an interesting show, I think.
Yeah.
So tell me how you first heard about Skinwalker Ranch.
Good question. I first heard about Skinwalker Ranch, oh gosh, I think it was probably over a decade ago. And I was at Barnes & Noble, of all places, in Salt Lake City, and happened upon a book, Hunt for the Skinwalker, by Dr. Colm Kelleher and George Knapp, that introduced the entire, history, at least up until 2005, the ranch and the mysterious events surrounding kind of their investigation, and bought that book, read it, thought it was quite interesting. I read quite a bit, so I read several books a week at least, and I thought it was intriguing, mostly because it really involved a piece of property in Utah. And I thought it was an interesting footnote in Utah history. And then I put it up on my shelf and really didn't think anything more about the ranch until 2015. So I bought the book at Barnes & Noble just like anyone else, and was then later introduced to the ranch and Mr. Bigelow in 2015, which ultimately led to my acquisition of the property the first week in April 2016, over 4 years ago.
So I guess when you first read the book, you were probably somewhat skeptical of the events that were described within it. Would that be accurate at the time?
Absolutely skeptical. I found the book very entertaining. I thought it was intriguing. I thought it was entertaining. It was a fun read, and I really didn't look at it as anything more than that. I didn't really consider the book a scientific work or investigation. I had never met George Knapp or Colm Kelleher or Mr. Bigelow, for that matter, and I just found it to be probably most interesting because of its location. But other than that, approached it with a high degree of skepticism, and I have up until really getting more into our investigation. I had always had it more of a healthy but skeptical look at the not only topics like the ranch, but also the UFO phenomena, ghosts, orbs, you name it, all of the high strangeness that people claim occurs in the world.
So what was the tipping point for you then, when you kind of flipped over from being skeptical about all these phenomena to actually thinking that there might be something to them, or at least something to what's going on in the ranch?
Yeah, good question. I flew down to Las Vegas in 2015 and spent many hours with Robert Bigelow, the previous owner, at his Bigelow Aerospace compound, which was quite impressive. I not only found him to be a kindred spirit in terms of some of his background in real estate development and whatnot, but I found his interest in some of these more controversial topics quite intriguing. And I was introduced to Colm Kelleher and a few others during that exchange, and sitting across from them and hearing their very sober accounts and explanation of events and what occurred on the ranch during their, roughly 20-year ownership and investigation, caused me to pause. These seemed like very credible people to me, and in a lot of respects. And I would say that's when my interest perked up I didn't become a believer, if you will, or I still, approached the topic with a high degree of skepticism, but I tried to keep an open mind in approaching the property, and really carrying forward my own investigation. There really wasn't much of an information exchange that occurred relative to the acquisition of the property. Mr. Bigelow was very clear about the fact that he was selling the property as is. I think he saw me as not only also a fellow kindred spirit, but a rightful successor to hopefully what he had created, and that I told him that if I had the opportunity to acquire the property, it would be my intention to bring in my own team of experts, of scientists, in order to document the events and really the nature of what had been reported there. But to be candid, I fully expected that there was a 95% probability or greater that that there was going to be a natural, more prosaic explanation behind what had been reported. And I kind of looked at the ranch and the accounts as being probably most likely nothing more than an adult scientific snipe hunt of sorts. I don't know if growing up, I was in the Boy Scouts. I was an Eagle Scout, and one of the activities that we were involved in scouting, was kind of a rite of passage with the younger scouts, where we would initiate them through convincing them that they were tracking or hunting, this elusive creature up in the forest, this snipe. And, if you're familiar with this, with this sort of thing, by the end of the evening, all of the young scouts are absolutely 100% convinced. They are absolutely certain that there is a snipe, that there is truly something that they're hearing out in the brush, that they're either hunting or that is hunting them. And again, no offense to any of the people who had worked on the ranch previously at all, but I thought the most likely explanation for a lot of what had been reported was that it was nothing more than the result of groupthink. A lot of front-loaded groupthink, and that people had stirred themselves up into believing that they were seeing something unusual that most likely didn't have anything extraordinary to do with it.
So what was your goal then? If you believe that, did you believe that about just the majority of the sightings, or just about all of the things that went on? Or did you think there was a fraction of them that had something that was worth investigating?
No, I really kept an open mind, and I didn't make any assumptions. In fact, I didn't assume that any of the events were true. I also didn't go so far as to discredit or say that they weren't true. I thought, well, what has come before, what has been reported before, most of which had been anecdotal in nature, was not really easily proved. And the only way to get to the bottom of whether there was any reality to what had been claimed was to employ scientific tools and resources in service to really studying the ranch, and to truly see if there was a phenomena at work.
Yeah, people get talking about the phenomena, and I think it's interesting that it's very difficult to pin down what this phenomena is that you're studying. Like Bigelow said once that they couldn't study it scientifically because it never repeated itself. It was always something different. So you couldn't set up an experiment to do the same thing. And there's these various different things that happen. Is there a way of characterizing what this phenomena actually is, or some characterization of the phenomena just being other than just being a really strange place where things happen?
Yeah, good question. You have to have something that is repeatable in order to really test a hypothesis. As you know, you really have to be able to find repeatable results and to be able to properly characterize it. And you're right. in approaching the claims associated with the ranch historically, the nature of what was being claimed was not only elusive but rather ambiguous. And you know, I came into this having never seen a UFO, having never claimed to have seen a ghost or an orb or anything of a supernatural nature, and I honestly thought that the likely result would probably be, you know, finding some type of natural explanation for what was occurring.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, you know, the first 6 months, for half a year of owning it, in all of my visits out to the ranch, I didn't experience it or witness anything that I would say was unusual. It just seemed like a very beautiful scenic backdrop. In fact, it's right out of John Wayne Western movie, or Westworld is probably a more relevant present point of reference. I mean, the backdrop of Skinwalker Ranch is very reminiscent of what you'd see in, you know, season 1 or 2 of Westworld. And I think that was probably the first surprise that I had upon inspecting the property, was how beautifully striking the landscape was and how diverse. I mean, you have everything from a red rock mesa that spans the entire property to cave systems. You have a number of old pioneer homesteads that are over 100 years old that are still standing, barely. You have, you know, some interesting waterways that traverse the property, and it you know, that was something that was completely unexpected. It's difficult to really picture what the ranch landscape looks like simply based on the description in George Knapp and Colm Kelleher's book. And when I came in to actually to inspect the property, the week I closed on it, I flew in via helicopter, and I was shocked at how beautiful the place was. I was expecting probably more flat topography, more desert prairie type of landscape, and I was wholly unprepared for the diversity.
It is very very striking looking. There's lots of nice drone shots in the TV show, and you've got the mesa there with all the rocks tumbling down it and giant boulders, and then the flat land and the river. It's very interesting looking. So you didn't, you said for the first 6 months you didn't have any experiences. Have you personally had some kind of, supernatural or UFO type experience since then?
Absolutely. What was recorded during the first 6 months before I really witnessed anything myself personally was interesting. I mean, one of the first things that I did with the property upon purchasing the ranch was I employed a drone aerial surveyor that conducted numerous drone surveys of the property and the surrounding area in order to really document every inch of the property. I wanted to start establishing a historical record that would track the landscape, any changes in the landscape, anything that would be interesting, so we would have a baseline to continue measuring against as we really let our investigation unfold. The first several years of my ownership of the property, I'd probably say the first 3 years was really characterized best as an observational science exercise.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a lot of really aggressive experimentation like you see on the television program. A lot of it was really carefully and methodically, establishing the surveillance, monitoring and some of the other instrumentation in order to truly document what was happening on the property. But to answer your question, before I had my own experience, we had captured a number of interesting images, and I think you picked out a couple of those images from that were, seen briefly in Jeremy Corbell's documentary Hunt for the Skinwalker, which was I don't know when that was released, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago.
Yeah, I think so.
to be clear, I thought they were very interesting images. I mean, we captured a few daylight images of unidentified flying objects. I thought it was intriguing in that when we checked, the flight data, the database history, tracking, the commercial and private air traffic in the basin during the period of time that those images were taken by my drone aerial surveyor, there wasn't anything reported. There was no known traffic, and I know very well that there are those that don't, have the appropriate equipment, and you have from time to time, some aerial activity that doesn't show up on some of the sensors. But I thought it was interesting. I thought to have multiple events that were witnessed, that had multiple witnesses with them of what appeared to be unusual craft on or around the property or objects, I found to be intriguing. And that's probably when my interest started perking up. That was in June of 2016. We had a number of events that occurred that were recorded, images captured, and what it did more than anything is it inspired me to improve our systems on the property, our data collection, and our camera surveillance system, so we can better monitor and record that which was occurring.
Yeah, that's those three photos that you referenced there. I looked at those, and I noticed that they had the metadata in the corner. They were taken with an iPhone 6s Plus,
Correct.
Which isn't a particularly good camera for taking photos of planes that are a long way away. So,
yeah.
I mean, to me, what you showed in those photos was very consistent with just, in one case, the black dot, like, some kind of fly or a bird. And the other two kind of look like planes to me. You get the white cigar shape, which is typical of a plane seen at some distance. And then there's another one looked like a plane higher up, like something like, something with a coloration, like different livery, or red wings or a red body. But they didn't look to me, they didn't look too inconsistent with planes. And you talk about the ADS-B data, which is the flight tracking data.
Right.
And there aren't really any receivers in that area. You quite often see dropouts in that area because there's very few, it's not very, very populated. I believe you have your own receiver on the ranch, but I don't know if that was operating at that time.
Yeah, what you do see reliably is you do see the air traffic that surrounds the basin, and you can
right.
Fairly reliably track, conventional aircraft that are coming in and out. I will say the image that you're referencing relative to the black dot that was kind of over the shoulder of a gentleman. That was not taken with an iPhone 6s. That was actually taken by another individual. It was actually taken by a visitor to the ranch on the day of I think it was October 16th, 2016, and it was a Nikon. It's actually a high quality Nikon camera that captured a number of really interesting images. And it was a Nikon D5000 camera, whatever that is. So for what it's worth, we have a number of images that were captured in June that were really randomly. I mean, there was no expectation that they were going to go out and capture photographic images of UFOs. It just, it happened randomly. And those were the daylight images that you see depicted. One was over the mesa. We often refer to it playfully as the Millennium Falcon image because it kind of looks like a Millennium Falcon from Star Wars.
Because it's kind of like a white line, isn't it, viewed from the side?
Yeah, it's a little bit similar to the Tic Tac video image and whatnot. That was taken, the first part of June, and then the other image that we that same individual took on his iPhone that, you see the metadata displayed for, was actually above the homestead one, or above the main pasture right outside of the homestead. And it was an interesting object that was glowing, that actually appeared right above the pasture and just stood there. It was just stationary. And then it zipped off. And while it was sitting there for probably, I don't know, a minute or two, without moving, he was able to capture that image on his iPhone. And then then whatever it was quickly departed. But it definitely wasn't an airplane, because it just sat there stationary. If there was a conventional explanation for it, it would be a drone, for example, but it didn't seem to operate like any drone that at least we're familiar with, or could actually match up with that imagery.
Yeah, it's a shame he didn't take video of it, which would have been these still photos have big problems, because it's very difficult to get a sense of how fast things are moving, or if they're moving at a constant rate.
It's very
and judging distance is very hard as well. You described one as being over the mesa, and it looks like it's this white thing that's over the mesa. But if it was over the mesa, it would essentially be like an aluminum rod or something, because it's not very far to the mesa from that spot, like about half a mile or so.
Oh, correct. No, it's quite off in the distance. I mean, but visually, the object obviously wasn't stationary, literally above the mesa. It was literally looking to the north of Homestead One, or the main ranch house, over the mesa out into the distance. So it was probably more clearly oriented somewhere around Bottle Hollow, or up in that vicinity. I mean, it's, without other angles, to allow for better spatial awareness, it's impossible to be able to identify the exact size and scale and location.
Yeah, I think without knowing any context of it, just looking at that from, I do a lot of plane analyzing data from that type of thing, and it could well be a plane at high altitude at 30,000 feet that's about 20 miles away. I think a lot of people don't realize how far away planes are when you're looking kind of over there, rather than up at 45 degrees. It's a fairly low angle, essentially, when you're just looking up over the mesa.
It appeared to be it appeared to be closer. I guess what I found most intriguing was the fact that there wasn't any flight data showing anything coming or going from the vicinity or the basin in that area that would align with that photo image. I had the same suspicion when my drone surveyor brought me the image. In fact, he called and said, I've got this image on my iPhone. I want to show it to you. And I said, I want you to stop everything. I said, drop everything. I want you to drive straight from the ranch, drive 2.5 hours to my office, and I want you to plug your phone right into my graphics director's computer, because I don't want anyone else touching your phone. If there's something legitimate that you believe you've captured, if there's something truly anomalous, I don't want anything compromising either the metadata or the integrity of that image. And so when he brought it to me, it was interesting following kind of the initial analysis of the photo. I mean, the first place we turned, was really the flight data, and that's when I scratched my head. That's when I thought, that's interesting that we couldn't line it up with anything conventional.
Yeah. Well, I totally believe that that's what happened, but I've had a lot of experience of people saying that they couldn't line things up with the flight data. When I do a lot of the chemtrails conspiracy theory is one of the things that I look into a lot, and so a lot of people say I saw this plane spraying and I couldn't find it on Flight Router 24, and then they send me a photo, and then I look at the data and I see it's actually a bit further away or a bit to the left or something like that. So sure. It's unless you had a lot of experience looking at photos and flight radar, it is possible that you can actually misidentify it. Of course, it could be possible that it wasn't. wasn't on the radar. And it could, of course, be possible that it was some kind of weird, unusual flying object or a drone or something. It's hard to
it's
say.
obviously not conclusive. I mean, I've been very careful not to claim that it's an alien craft or anything of that nature. Only that we find that the circumstances surrounding, the photography, that image, and the lack of evidence of anything conventional, I think bears some further investigation.
Yeah.
And at the very least, what it did is it inspired me to try to carefully improve our data logging and surveillance efforts out at the ranch. I mean, it has been a process, not an event. We see that evidence with the television program as well. It's, we're learning a lot, and we're making incremental improvements.
So you said these three images and other things around like 2016 were kind of what triggered your interest and your feeling that there was something really worth investigating, or accelerated that process. Have you personally seen anything with your own eyes that is unusual? Can you talk about that?
In fact, we had a circumstance in October 2016 where we were entertaining some prominent visitors that flew in for the day. In fact, the senior member of that group, had wanted to visit the ranch for many years, had apparently approached the Bigelow people in order to get permission, and was not granted access. And when he reached out to me through some science advisors, I was open, and I said, look, as long as you sign a liability waiver and a confidentiality agreement, I don't have any problem hosting you and your team for the day. And so we welcomed them out to the ranch. I had already owned the property for 6 months and had been visiting, the property every month in order to kind of address what needed to be done in order to improve the facilities there, and also really wrap my mind around what the investigation needed to look like moving forward. Well, we ended up going out to the property with this group, and it seemed almost immediately upon our arrival, we had some frustrating things occur. We had some cell phone anomalies. My principal investigator that you see on the show was very surprised to see that his iPhone started malfunctioning for no apparent reason right up on the mesa. In fact, it started wigging out and turning a magenta color, and he was pretty surprised. He was alarmed by what he was seeing, and called me up to the mesa. I quickly hiked up the face of it, and by the time I got up there, the phone wasn't malfunctioning, and I just chuckled. I said, that's funny. And he scratched his head as well. He says, I wish you could have seen this. And so we proceeded and ended up taking this group out to the old Homestead area, Homestead 2. And as we piled out of the UTV and the other vehicles that were transporting these visitors, and we made our way around to the front of the old homesteads there, the group collectively started exclaiming that they were feeling some vertigo. In fact, I was probably about, 30, 40 feet away from the main group that had assembled right in front of those old homesteads. And they were all, I heard them all say, wow, are you feeling what I'm feeling? And, they were all, expressing some concern that they felt some vertigo. And so I quickly run over to the group, and I don't feel anything. But Eric Bard, who's sitting there with that same smartphone that had apparently been experiencing some difficulty earlier, he says, look at my phone, look at what is happening. And sure enough, right there, the phone was turning magenta, was malfunctioning, and he was able to screen capture the change on the phone. Yeah. And so we which was great. He was able to, he had enough presence of mind. And that's one of the problems, as you've seen in addressing these topics from a skeptical point of view over the years. People don't have the presence of mind when they're in the moment to really properly document or record what they're witnessing. And he did. He actually ended up doing a screen capture. We thought that was intriguing. And as we were all sitting there kind of comparing notes, and everyone was saying, gosh, that was a funny sensation that was felt for a number of, it was probably about, I don't know, 10, 20 seconds that the group was experiencing that collectively. And this is a diverse group. These aren't friends. These aren't people that had met previously. We brought together a diversity of participants for that day. And so it was interesting to see all of these people from different backgrounds experiencing this. And then, while we're standing there, I noticed that the main security, the gentleman who had accompanied our principal guest for the day, that had introduced himself as private security for this gentleman, was absent. And I thought, where's George? His name was George. I said, where is George at? Has anyone seen George? And by this time, about 10 minutes had lapsed as we had, been comparing notes. And I walked around the back end of the homestead to try to see where this gentleman was. And as I was walking around to the back of the old homesteads, it was like I entered an anechoic chamber, a soundproof room. And there were these there was an auditory sensation. It was almost like my ears were boxed, and all of the ambient noise, to a degree, was completely muted. And right there in the distance, where we had parked the Ranger, the Polaris Ranger UTV, standing upright in the back of the Ranger was this huge, about 6'5", built like a tank gentleman. And so I continued to walk toward the UTV, having this sensation. And as I made my way and grew closer, the ambient noise came back and was restored, which I thought was interesting. And I yelled to him and I said, George. And it was clear that his eyes were closed. He was standing, fully upright in the back of this UTV. And by the time I got up there, his eyes fluttered open. I said, what are you doing? Is something wrong? And he looked down at me and he says, well, that was strange. And I said, so what's happening? And he said, well, as soon as all of you piled out of the UTV to make your way around to the front of the homestead, I was paralyzed and blacked out. And he says, how long have I been back here? And I said, well, it's probably been about 10 minutes. And he just shook his head. And he said, that was the strangest thing. I don't know what happened. I said, have you ever had this occur in your life? Have you ever had something like this happen? He said, no. He was pretty stoic, very serious, sober man. It was interesting. That morning when I first met him, I kind of chuckled and was joking about all of the UFO claims and the high strangeness and everything surrounding the property when we were getting them to sign the confidentiality and the liability waivers. And I asked them point blank, so do you believe in UFOs? Do you believe in the phenomenon? And this gentleman in particular said, absolutely not. I'm just here as security to accompany my friend for the day's events. And he was very sober, very serious in his statement that he didn't believe it. But anyways, I found that interesting. And about that time, as he got out and we walked around the front, I looked down. I wanted to take some group photos of everyone. And lo and behold, my phone was dead. It was completely dead. The battery had been completely drained. It was interesting. I'll tell you, we got out there and I had at least 80% charge on my iPhone. And it was very frustrating, simply because that's what we've come to rely on for our cameras, to record, momentous occasions and whatnot. And as I walked around the front, I said, Jesus, my phone's gone dead. It's completely drained. Well, guess what? The others' phones were drained as well. And so I said, well, we have phone chargers back at the command center, back at the security trailer. Why don't we all, why don't we all hop back in and we'll take our phones back? And, I need to have access to my text messaging, to my email, because this is in the middle of the day, middle of the week. And I stay connected 24/7 to my office, to my business. And I said, I can't just not have connectivity. And so we ended up taking the phones back, plugging them in, and decided to go back out to not only the homesteads, but also to look at the what I call the observation towers, or what is infamously referred to as the bait pens.
Yeah.
I'm learning quickly not to refer to them as the bait pens,
Yes.
which was a carryover from the Bigelow era. That's really what they were referred to, and that reference, of course, unfortunately carried on through the last several years as we have managed the property. But I'm getting to the punchline here. I'm getting to the event. As we went back out and we looked at the observation towers, which are pretty ominous. You see them on the show quite a bit.
Look like guard towers.
Exactly. They're all enclosed with barbed wire fence, and they had their purpose back during the Bigelow investigation and ownership. But it was interesting as we were making our way later in the afternoon back from the old homesteads toward the security trailer to retrieve our devices, to get our phones back. All of a sudden behind me in this open air Polaris Ranger, one of the individuals shouted and said, "Hey, stop the vehicle." And I was driving. And so I tried to bring it to a stop. And I said, what's going on? I look over my shoulder at him, and he's pointing up toward the mesa, which is on the left. It's to my left, or basically the north side of the property. And he says, "Look at that. What is that?" And lo and behold, right above the mesa was a silver grayish disc-like object. And it was just sitting there stationary. And what was interesting, there were a number of hawks that had been flying that we'd been observing in the day, and there were some birds flying around, but right beyond the hawks, above the mesa, was this object that was probably, just trying to spatially identify how big it was probably 40 to 50 feet long. And the three of us that were pointing up at it said, what is that? And then all of a sudden, within about 3 to 4 seconds, it changed position. And it didn't float, it didn't move in a conventional way. It literally changed position, roughly 50 feet in the blink of an eye. Almost like a video game. And it shifted position to the north or to the left by 50 feet. And then we all exclaimed, we were like, wow, how did it just do that? And then about 3-4 seconds later, it dropped to a position, kind of a hover position right above the mesa, dropped about 50 feet, again, instantaneously. A few seconds later, it shifted again to the right. And then in the blink of an eye, it was gone. It literally, it was almost like it was reduced to a dot and was gone. The entire event that was witnessed by the three of us was about a 20-second event. I was very frustrated because, again, our phones had been dead, and it all happened so quickly. But it left us all very surprised, and it was so big. This was not just some dot in the sky or some silver white orb-like looking object. It was literally a silverish gray disc in the fashion of what people have described for decades as being kind of your traditional flying saucer type of object. Right. And to this day, one thing that happened following that event, when we all went back and we concluded our day and everyone departed, my principal investigator, Eric Bard, who, by the way, very skeptical. He entered this with the same really mindset that I had, which was, that there was really a natural explanation for all of what had been recorded, or at least claimed to have occurred on the ranch. Well, Eric quickly, after that day, ended up separately interviewing the other two gentlemen and myself in order to, independently, take down their account of the incident in order to see if there were some consistencies or inconsistencies. And I think he was very surprised in that our accounts were virtually identical. We all viewed the same event. We all essentially had the same experience. And most interesting, the big guy, George, that had been there as security, that had been rendered catatonic in the back of that UTV during that earlier experience, the next day ended up in the hospital and was ill for 3 weeks. Ended up reporting that for 3 weeks he had he was very, very sick, and the doctors apparently couldn't diagnose what he was sick with. It was flu-like. It was almost a flu-like illness that rendered him really kind of flat on his back. He was bedridden for a number of weeks. And this guy has got to be one of the biggest, most strong people that I've ever encountered in my life. And so I hope you don't mind the lengthy account that I just shared, but
more details.
It changed. That day changed my perspective.
Right.
Did I suddenly believe in aliens visiting from Mars or outer space? No. But did I have a more open mind? You can't unsee something like that. And I think what it did is it inspired me to use a bit more diligence and to hopefully invest the resources needed in order to fully understand what was happening on and around that property.
Yeah,
to this day, it remains interesting.
That was the day, I guess, of your So this, you all saw this silver disc type thing, like over the mesa, or some just to the north. Did you afterwards, when you gave your accounts, did you draw diagrams of what it looked like and where it was spatially and the size of it and things like that?
Yeah,
and like
you bet.
The motion path, perhaps.
Yep. So, in fact, I immediately went home and I tried to Photoshop kind of a
that's
diagram.
Good. That's very good.
Eric Bard, he wanted not only me to put it in writing, he wanted me to carefully document my testimony of what had happened, but he wanted me to visually provide him with a reference or a diagram. And so, we identified a photo image that had been taken earlier of really that portion of the mesa, and roughly, within a pretty reliable distance. I mean, probably within, 100 feet of where we were parked and witnessed that incident. We kind of identified a comparable image that we could use as a reference point, and use that as kind of an illustrative example of what had happened that day.
That's good. That's the way to do it.
Yeah. So very interesting.
Yeah. So, you have lots of cameras on the ranch now, and you've had these cameras set up for quite a while. Have they captured anything of that magnitude of interest?
Yes. We've had a few. We've had actually a handful of other incidents that have been recorded. In fact, both daytime and nighttime. We've had a number of I guess what you call UFO sightings at night over the ranch that we have not been able to assign a conventional explanation to. We're still analyzing some of that, and
lights in the sky type thing at night. You can't generally see details of things.
Yeah, lights in the sky. And, we kind of alluded to this in the first episode of the television program, luminous phenomena, on the mesa that has been recorded and witnessed by people. I mean, we've had numerous witnesses coupled with the video imagery. We've had, night vision footage, that has captured some of this, what appears to be anomalous activity. And along with that, we've seen lights in the sky that have been very interesting in the way that they've behaved. Some of the behavior is not conventional UFO behavior. It's not like a spaceship or some object just hovering. It's, we have one video where we captured an object that is moving so erratically. And it's during a period of time. In fact, I think it was during December. I think it was a couple of years ago, right before Christmas. I think it was December 23rd. And the object was moving so erratically in so many different ways that it was quite unusual. And coupled with that imagery, we saw a reaction on the mesa. We saw luminous phenomena that seemed to correlate with the unidentified flying object, or whatever you'd call it or characterize it as. One thing I continue to be reminded of on a week-to-week basis. In fact, I've heard this mantra probably now 1,000 times during my ownership of the ranch, and that has come from Eric Bard, who continues to say, "Brandon, correlation is not causation." I don't think there's been a week that has gone by in the last 4 years since bringing him on board and acquiring the property and really launching our investigation that I have not been reminded of that just because you're seeing events that defy explanation or seem to be unusual, it doesn't mean that the correlation of certain events, points to some type of unusual cause. You have to have other data to support your claims.
So all this footage you've got a variety of ones that are interesting, and you've got some where you've got like a possible correlation between things. You obviously got all this like on a bunch of hard drives somewhere. Why don't you release all of this footage and let people have a look at it?
We're going to. Part of it is, to be candid, time. This is such a small part of my life. I work 18 to 20 hours a day. I represent several hundred prominent commercial real estate projects, buildings. Right now I have, well over 1 million, probably about 1.4 million square feet of office developments under construction right now that I have responsibility for. And that has been the case, for the last 20 years of my career. And
couldn't you just tell one of your investigators, put all the good footage on a Dropbox and
link? We're working on it. So one thing that we're looking to release in the next, I don't know. My hope is by the time this series finale occurs next Tuesday, we hope to launch a web portal that I've been investing in that will actually allow for more peer review and the release of some of these other videos and anomalies. The analysis that has been conducted. I really want to take a very collaborative, transparent approach to what we are experiencing on the property, what we are recording, and I think having a more inclusive, collaborative approach with the community will hopefully help us get to the bottom of what really is at work at Skinwalker Ranch.
I think you will, at the very least, be able to exclude some things, because we'll be able to identify some things as aircraft or whatever. This is something that I think it's happened before with various other UFO investigations, where people have kept the data, for themselves and analyzed it, and then when it's eventually released to the broader audience, it can be analyzed, and people actually do figure out what it was, even though the investigators couldn't figure it out, just because they happen to have some domain-specific knowledge, in a very narrow domain that the investigators might not have.
Yeah, the great challenge with this effort is being able to separate the signal from the noise.
Mm-hmm.
And I think having more eyes, more experts, more opinions, frankly, that can weigh in and bring different perspectives and skill sets to the table will hopefully help us yield better results. I've always believed in really employing a multidisciplinary approach to the problem set at the ranch. I don't think you can just simply bring on an astrophysicist or a plasma physicist, if you will, to be able to render an opinion relative to what is being seen. I think you need to bring people from I think a number of various disciplines, and I think having some non-scientists as well, having some fresh eyes that may not employ the same approach can help probably answer some of the questions, or at least open discussions that will lead to truly understanding what is happening. But I've really wanted to get to the bottom of the truth. I'm hopeful that what we're doing right now will help us bring that forward.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier about getting your the investigator to bring his phone to you so you could get the raw footage with the metadata. And if you do release data, I think it's really important to make sure you release like all of the contextual data around that and the original footage and the original raw files if possible. I know they can get kind of big, but data space is cheap nowadays. So I would download a 1 gigabyte video file if it meant I would get a better version of that, so I could analyze it a bit better. So please, if you're going to upload that, there's a bunch of people like on Metabunk, my website, who just like doing this type of thing. We like looking at videos and photos and trying to figure out what's actually on the video or the photo. So is it a plane? Is it a bird? Is it a alien spaceship? Is it a army secret drone? Whatever it is, you want to find out what it is. And of course, like a lot of the time, it ends up being fairly mundane, but sometimes we can't figure out what it is. So it would be good to use that resource, not just Metabunk, but everybody on Twitter and Facebook and Reddit who are interested in that type of thing as well.
Yeah, I've wanted to bring kind of a whole new approach to these topics. I've and you see this. I mean, I've really worked hard to be as transparent, as candid as I can relative to the nature of our investigation, our motivations, and really what we're trying to accomplish here at Skinwalker Ranch. If I believe that this could very well be a living laboratory of sorts. It sure appears to be that way, based on the diversity of phenomena that continues to be recorded on the property. I mean, when you bring together data that confirms everything from the electromagnetic anomalies to the acute medical episodes that seem to accompany these electromagnetic events, and then you have photographic or videographic evidence that also can accompany that, coupled with witness testimony, multiple witnesses. So you're not just taking one person's word for it. You have multiple parties that are attesting to to what is being observed. I think it gets interesting. And that's what I did not expect relative to the ranch, is I didn't expect that we would see so much, that we would see such a diversity of activity and events. And you talk about repeating results, being able to properly characterize what is happening. If you're really going to have a scientific investigation, if you're really going to use scientific rigor and principles, you have to build boundary conditions around your investigation and be able to repeat your experiments, and at least be able to show that there's truly something at work other than something that is just anomalous that you have to take someone's word for it. And one thing that we've seen that is consistent is the electromagnetic. The cell phone anomalies Eric Bard has conducted quite a bit of research into what type of acute medical episodes can accompany extreme electromagnetic, interference or events. Even the auditory phenomena that I experienced. I related to you my experience of walking around the back of the old homestead and having this auditory sensation where all the ambient noise was essentially muted, and it truly felt like I stepped into a soundproof chamber of sorts. And it's interesting, electromagnetic phenomena at times, and that kind of interference can actually create those kind of reactions biologically.
Yeah. Let's talk about the show, the History Channel show, because some of what you said is stuff that is shown on that show. How did that come about? Did they approach you?
Yes. So good question. I was, within months of acquiring the property, we were assaulted by numerous requests. I kept my identity completely private. In fact, you'd be hard pressed if I wouldn't have gone public. There really isn't anything on the title or in the public domain that would actually tie my identity to the entity, to Adamantium Real Estate LLC, which is the special purpose entity that I established for owning and operating the ranch. And I really had no interest in opening the property up for a television effort. I was hit up for about a year. It was probably a solid year where I was approached by individuals involved with the History Channel and A&E Network that wanted to pitch me on an investigative series of sorts. And after about a year, I finally acquiesced to at least take a meeting and hear what they had in mind, and at least be able to close that door, close that chapter in a respectful manner. And when we ended up having those discussions initially, which was, I don't know, November of, hang on, all my years are running together here. It was October, November of 2018. I was intrigued, but it wasn't until I actually met with Kevin Burns of Prometheus Entertainment, who's kind of the go-to guy, I guess, for these type of programs on the History Channel. When Kevin Burns flew out with his team to meet with me after a year of people bugging the hell out of me through my managers and through intermediaries, I finally said, I'm willing to take a meeting. I'm willing to have a discussion. And when I sat down with the group representing the History Channel and pitching me on this, I shared my motivation, my story, but I said, look, I'm not interested in any type of effort that would involve fabricating or faking, anything that would be contrived. I've seen enough of these stupid programs, people tripping over themselves in the dark with night vision goggles, and I didn't want this effort and really the nature of our investigation reduced to that type of program. And I told them, I said, look, if we were to engage, I have a number of conditions. Number one, it has to be absolute truth. Everything that you record, everything that is displayed has to be 100% true. You can't fabricate anything. Number two, you're going to have to use my team. I'm not interested in casting people, bringing in people from the outside that may be front-loaded, or maybe you may have another agenda that may run contrary, that could undermine the integrity of what we're doing. And, I introduced my team, which includes people that I've known my whole life. at least since I was 18 years old. And I said, look, you're going to have to work with my team in order to preserve the integrity and the authenticity of what we're doing out there in the basin at Skinwalker Ranch. Number 3, I asked that my identity be kept confidential. I did not want my identity to be revealed. I didn't want to come out and have any of my professional endeavors be compromised or potentially distracted as a result of my involvement with this ranch and with these efforts. And as we met and we visited, they had no problem granting me my first 2 conditions, but they came back and said, look, we do not believe that we can appropriately address the topic of the ranch and really the team and create a credible investigative series without your involvement, without you, in essence, coming out of the closet and being brave enough to reveal your identity. And they said, we really believe that that's essential to really preserving the integrity of what you're trying to establish here. And so I had to give it a lot of thought, and I ultimately and reluctantly agreed to participate because I think they had a point. I agreed. I said, look, there's a lot of people out there that have either kept their identities secret or they have not engaged with the community. They have not been forthcoming or transparent. They've sequestered themselves away from the community and frankly have not been willing to come forward in a collaborative way. And I don't blame them. I mean, I can completely understand, especially now, why so many credible people that are interested in these topics avoid going public with their interest, or really engaging with the public relative to their interest, even those with resources.
So have you got some kind of blowback from your appearances? Has it affected your business dealings at all?
Not yet. So thankfully, I haven't, at least that I'm aware of, I haven't had any negative blowback, but it has been interesting, to see all of the cast of characters involved with the community, with ufology, all of the enthusiasts. And, I have to tell you, I think it's fun to engage with people that share similar interests, that are really approaching this sincerely, that are trying to get to the bottom of, what is at work with the UFO phenomena and other related claims. But I think there are a lot of people who also have their own agendas. And I think that historically speaking, there are a lot of bad actors. I think there are a lot of charlatans. There are a lot of bullshit artists. I don't know how else to put it, but I think being able to separate fact from fiction and being able to separate those who have egos or trying to monetize their interest in this from those that are truly sincerely engaged in really analyzing these topics and really addressing them. I mean, it's a difficult task. I'd mentioned earlier, this process is largely a process of trying to separate the signal from the noise. And I think, unfortunately, the majority of what you see out there right now is a lot of noise. And it's difficult to be able to reach in and to be able to pierce that and to extract the real meaningful data and accounts that are legit.
Yeah, it is. There is a lot of noise out there, and you specified in your agreement that you wanted there to be nothing fabricated in the show. But I must say there are a few things that we've discussed on Twitter that kind of seem to verge on fabrication. Like, for example, as episode 4, the high strangeness. This is the one with the rocket launch and the UFO appearances. There's a scene there where they see this UFO in the distance, and they're all standing on the on the deck outside the ranch house, and
Right.
they're all looking up at this UFO. And the weird thing is that none of them have any binoculars. And they go on to
Right.
say that then, they couldn't identify it, and they don't know what it is, and it was like weirdly glowing object. But it seems like if they had binoculars, they would have been to look at it and see that it was, probably just a plane. Seems like that. They don't seem like they're kind of part of a genuine investigation. Like if people are there, thinking that they might see UFOs, surely they would have binoculars. And it's especially strange because later in episode 7, you have another scene where a UFO or something is spotted, and it's a helicopter, actually, the helicopter scene, and everybody's there with binoculars. There's
Right.
there's like 4 different sets of binoculars, and one guy with a long telescope type thing.
Yeah, I would say the fact that when they were doing they were conducting the rocket test, the fact that they didn't have binoculars there, frankly, I think proves that there wasn't something contrived. They weren't all at the ready. I don't believe that anyone was expecting that they're going to see some silver disc in the sky. I actually think that they were genuinely surprised by that. So I respectfully disagree a bit in that I think that if they really were trying to, they were trying to anticipate or believe that they were going to take something that was occurring in the atmosphere and try to I don't know, conjure up.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was fabricated as such, but it just seems rather odd that, if this is the type of thing they were looking out for, and they're going to launch a rocket, you think they would want binoculars, and they're investigators.
Yeah, from what I understand, the point of the rocket test was not to stimulate UFO activity, but it was to test, RF,
measuring something.
ELF. It was equipped with sensors and such in order to do that. I don't think there was an expectation that it would trigger or act as a catalyst for revealing some type of anomalous UFO activity. And so I actually think that what you saw captured there is so typical of so many other UFO sightings where people are like astonished. They're not expecting it. And I will say that most of the crew that were there that witnessed it were very skeptical, did not believe in the reality of the UFO phenomena. They were just there to do a job. And I think, all of those people, and I think there were probably about a dozen people that witnessed those events that occurred over those minutes of filming the rocket exercise. I think, they all came away quite surprised by what they saw. And so it is interesting, though. On the helicopter incident, I have to give you really huge credit. In fact, I appreciate your investigative efforts and your due diligence in reaching out and frankly, verifying that there probably is a conventional explanation for that helicopter. The helicopter probably did deviate from its course, to come, look over the ranch, but that doesn't necessarily signify some covert surveillance of the property. And I really appreciated your diligence and really tracking that down. And I think that I think more of that. I think if we see more people like you helping us to be able to identify what may have a conventional explanation versus something that could be unexplained, will help advance the topic.
Yeah, that was quite a tricky investigation, actually, because there wasn't any ADS-B data there. There was a big gap in the helicopter flying from one side to the other, so I couldn't find it. I had to do a bunch of image searching to try to find out what helicopter it was. But I think, I appreciate that, but I still feel like there's some kind of unanswered questions about how that was portrayed on that episode. In particular, you did have everybody looking up with binoculars. One guy with a gun scope, quite large, long one, and they should have been able to see the number on the side of the helicopter. It was almost visible in the 1080p video that you had there. So
and I wasn't there, but from what I understand from all of the participants, whether it be the angle of the helicopter, whatever, they couldn't make out the numbers. And, for what it's worth, it's, they made it into a more dramatic event than it probably was. I mean, that's one of the challenges with television and with this particular medium is, there is a bit of drama. You have the music, you have the way that the content is edited that can sometimes detract from, the credibility of the events,
Right.
or to some degree, I think, be crafted in such a way to elicit a response. But what we've endeavored to do is we're not showing, like, for instance, we're not fabricating a helicopter, out of thin air. We're not trying to, for instance, the UFO sighting that the people had there, simultaneous with the rocket experiment. I mean, we captured what was truly a genuine, authentic reaction from the cast and crew associated with that event and with the experimentation that was happening. Same thing holds true. You probably recall the balloon, where they,
Yes.
the balloon incident. I mean, the gentleman, I can't remember his name, but the gentleman who they brought out, that deployed the balloon and the instrumentation was, and I think still is, truly baffled by the loss of the balloon, by what was recorded, what he observed. And that's what we have tried to do with probably varying levels of success, is we've tried to bring in third-party engineers and experts, whether we're approaching it, the ground penetrating radar studies or the drone thermography imaging relative to the site. We're looking into deep ground penetrating measurement technologies and some of these other experiments in order to understand, what is at work here over the ranch. And so you don't have to take our team's word for it. I think we've tried to, under the guidance of kind of the production team and whatnot, bring in other third parties that can hopefully help us advance the discussion.
Yeah. So, like, another thing that seems a little perhaps sensationalized, for want of a better word, is the electromagnetic radiation readings. Like, you have Travis Taylor, the scientist, doing a lot of looking at his Trifield meter. And I have a Trifield meter, which I bought a few weeks ago. They're fun little devices. I mean, they're essentially the devices that are sold to people who are kind of a bit paranoid about EMF radiation in their homes. And it works fairly well, but it only goes up to 20. So it's a pretty low level. It only goes for 20 milliwatts per meter squared. I'm going to turn it on, see what I'm at now. And it's like the types of numbers that you get on these Trifield meters. They kind of go all over the place, depending on how close they are to electrical equipment or to cell phones, things like that. And they can very easily peg out just in a normal situation, like in my room here. Now, obviously, you wouldn't expect that. You're out in the middle of a field. I've taken this out into the middle of my field out back. I also live on an old ranch, essentially. It's a housing development that was once a ranch, and it reads zero.
Not that I know of. Was it built on a graveyard?
Quite possibly, but only a graveyard of dead cows. But the Trifield meter, it works. You move it close to my Wi-Fi router, and it will go up to 20. It reads the maximum. You stay right next to the microwave, it will go up to 20. But when you see it in the show, you basically don't see that much difference to what I'm showing you here. Like, it pops up around the low numbers, like 5 to 10, something like that, and it oscillates a lot, and especially if it's near a phone. And in all of the situations that you show, Travis getting excited and he's waving it around, saying it's coming from here, it's coming from there, and it's going crazy, and it's making the little beeping noises. The numbers don't really seem that unusual to me, especially given the fact that there's a group of people around. Some of them have their cell phones, and some of them are not on airplane mode, and you can actually see that in some of the shots. and most of them are wearing wireless microphone packs that are attached to their back, and some of them can be fairly high powered. I think 250 milliwatts power of transmission. So what you're seeing in the show doesn't look like unusual levels of RF. Would you agree with that, or what do you think there was unusual, or was there like other sets of readings on other equipment that?
Good question. Good question and good observation. I'd say, let me make a blanket statement in that in both Dr. Taylor and Dr. Segala's defense, what we're seeing translated on the television program is a number of quick edits coupled with audio, and the video capturing their reactions and the events that were unfolding. And so I think there are times when, whatever the cameramen are recording on the handheld devices may not directly correlate with some of the statements in the moment that are being made by the scientists. And so, to a degree, I think there is a little bit of a challenge with the editing process. Again, when you're trying to approach an endeavor like this and to present a cohesive narrative that really accounts for what is happening. All that said, is kind of a preface to my next statement. I mean, I'm not as familiar. I mean, I don't present myself as an expert on these devices, and I'm probably not qualified to really, unfortunately, speak to some of your concerns. The only thing I can say, and this will sound like such a cop-out, I know you're going to chuckle, is that, all I can say is I have three scientists standing there, especially right. I have two gentlemen, with PhDs in physics that have worked with all sorts of electronics that are very well acquainted with what could be affecting the sensors at different times that is conventional. And when I have two individuals, one who has two PhDs and 3 master's degrees, and then I have another one who has a PhD and master's as well in topics that frankly approach, the instrumentation and the physics underpinning how these work. I have to defer to them and what their assessment is in the moment. And I don't believe I met Dr. Taylor in conjunction with engaging with the History Channel. He was the one party that they requested would be a potential scientist to bring on to challenge the team and to bring another set of eyes. And I was excited to bring him into the family, if you will. But Dr. Segala, I've had years of interaction with him, and he has always struck me as someone who employs the scientific method and is quite measured and sober in his approach to really analyzing the data. So that's a really long-winded way of me saying I don't really know how to address specific questions you may have relative to images flashing on the screen and what is being observed, and being able to again parse that which may be associated with interference as a result of the wireless devices that are employed with the recording, and that which is not. And again, I don't mean to sound like I'm trying to take the easy way out or trying to kick the can down the road, if you will, or trying to pass it off to someone else. But I think that's something that we need to look into more closely. And frankly, I think we're going to be able to address that topic, I think, a little bit more effectively in a season 2 in further treatments. One thing that I'm encouraged by is it appears that we're going to begin filming in short order, another 10 episodes, and really launching into a season 2 that will hopefully be able to address some of these topics with a little bit more diligence, and hopefully, I think, resolve some of the concerns that have been brought forward.
Yeah, I think so. That would be And I don't want to harp on the Trifield meter too much, but it does feature very strongly in the show. And
Sure.
and like you say, like your scientists aren't generally the ones waving it around. It's usually Dr. Taylor. And it's not just him showing it, flashing some numbers and them being suspicious. He does actually talk about those numbers as well. I think in the last episode, or perhaps the previous one, he says like, this is like 14 or something like that, and he says like, if I held this outside of a microwave, it would be around 2 or 3, and so 14 is like being inside the microwave, which is perhaps the most nonsensical description of the levels you could possibly imagine. I mean, for a start, if I hold this outside my microwave, it actually will peg out at 20. If you move it a bit further away, it will go down to 14. So suggesting that it's like the inside of a microwave, where the levels are literally, let me, off the top of my head, like 50,000 times higher for a 1,000-watt microwave. 50,000 times higher, or perhaps 50,000 times higher than what he was suggesting as being the inside of a microwave. It just doesn't make any sense, and it just strikes me as being something being played for drama rather than actual science.
Yeah, and all I can say is, Dr. Taylor's credentials speak for themselves. Dr. Segala's background, his credentials, and whether some of the edits had some of the data lost in translation, I'm not sure. I appreciate your criticism and your concern relative to what is shown in some of the claims and what was depicted. And I don't really have a satisfactory answer for you, other than to say that I think we had some highly competent people there making statements, and I would be very surprised if they were just making stuff up, or that they would go on camera misrepresenting the nature of the data or the readings just for the sake of television.
Yeah, I think perhaps charitably it is just being a bit overexcited about things and saying what came off the top of his head, because obviously he is a scientist and he would know that he wasn't inside a microwave at that point. So he was just going for a dramatic interpretation of what was going on.
Yeah, I don't have it. I don't have specific training in these areas. I don't have a PhD, let alone multiple PhDs addressing, scientific topics and instrumentation. And I have to rely on people to hopefully give me proper analysis and advise me appropriately. And if anything, I think what this television effort has taught me is to be more prepared for questions. I will admit, I mean, let me confess, I was not prepared for a lot of the questions that would come forward. Just simply because I'm busy. I've got a lot of this television show and this ranch really constitutes a very, very, very small part of my life, and is not a part of my day-to-day conventional activities that have consumed my life and career over the course of the last 25 years. But also, I'm going through a learning experience as well.
Sure.
And I'd mentioned earlier at the beginning of our podcast, this is really it's an evolution of really bringing online the instrumentation, bringing the type of experts. It's a process, not an event. We haven't had some seminal event where all of a sudden we flip a switch and then all of a sudden we have, perfect data that is, crystal clear and the right type of instrumentation. I hope to get there. So my intention is to hopefully make those improvements as we progress in service to really understanding what we're seeing, and frankly, to be able to give people like you an opportunity to collaborate and to weigh in on what we have recorded. I actually love that you took the time to even identify that with some of those images that we flashed on the documentary, for example, that we did have metadata that accompanied those pictures. I mean, I've tried to make sure that we're, you know, that we're credible, that we are, that we're having integrity with.
Certainly appreciate
this
that
investigation.
Yeah. So one last little quibble I have with the show is the fly, the dark UFO over the dead cow. From my looking at it, it looks just like other videos of flies flying by, because it's in two frames and it's a dark black blurry thing, and it's in about the right spot at the right time and the right size and speed and everything. So that featured fairly heavily, and it seems like it might feature in the next episode. Is there more to it?
You bet it will. All I can say is there are many people that have differing opinions. Again, those that were there, the scientists that have analyzed the footage, all of the events. And again, going back to, correlation does not necessarily mean causation, but it does make for some very interesting, discussion. And frankly, it helps us, I think, focus a lot of our efforts a little bit better when we see correlating events. I think, when it comes to your analysis, I haven't, to be honest, I haven't had a chance to even sit down with the team to review the footage in a disciplined manner in order to ask, how did we come to these conclusions 9 months ago? And I think that's what is somewhat lost in translation with a program like this is, these incidents were recorded last summer. And a lot of the data, the footage, a lot of the analysis that you see projected on screen, those conclusions were reached quite a while ago, and we haven't, frankly, gone back and revisited these things. And we, up until now, we haven't really established a portal or a forum to be able to engage peer review and to I think provide some further analysis that delves into some of these claims and these events. And I think that's what we hope to achieve. It's coincidental, but I would think that the period of time in between season 1's finale and a season 2 air date, hopefully not only will we have our web portal and our website that will go live to allow for some of these discussions to continue, but hopefully, we may be able to further discuss and unwrap the mystery involved with some of these claims before the next episodes air. I will say that the team is mobilized right now out in the basin. I mean, just this morning, I was receiving updates from Eric Bard, from Thomas Winterton, from the command center, where they're installing new instrumentation. We have a new significantly updated computer system that we've been putting into place that will assist, as well as a better backup battery system. I mean, one of the things that continues to frustrate me and the team is really how the equipment just continues to have challenges. I mean, equipment malfunctions have been normal.
It's a repeatable thing, though, isn't it? You're looking for something that's repeatable, and you've got cell phones going wrong all the time. Maybe you should just buy like 100 iPhones and arrange them in a grid somewhere and study what's going on with these iPhones.
I would love to do that. In fact, I think having a daisy chain of computers out at Homestead 2, and having them put together and see if there's some type of reaction or some type of anomalous activity that can be recorded associated with that effort would be interesting. And there is repeatability when it comes to the equipment malfunctions. A number of people online have asked a very good question. They've said, well, if your equipment is malfunctioning so often, if you're seeing battery battery depletion and all of these things. How are you able to capture these beautiful sweeping drone aerial shots? And, you're able to record these events in action. And I think it's important to note that a lot of the drone footage and whatnot, it may be recorded 15 minutes before or after. Again, through the editing process, they're trying to splice together a cohesive narrative that will hopefully, depict what is happening in a I think in a good manner that the audience can follow to a degree. Mm-hmm. But a lot of those things, I mean, we've had so many drones go down. We've had so many cameras that have ended up malfunctioning. I mean, we had a whole sequence where we had ground penetrating radar studies conducted up on the mesa, and all of the footage associated with that study ended up disappearing off of the digital drives. I'm not trying to assign some alien cause to it, but it is interesting. And again, what it does is it drives us to further investigate that, go back and try to repeat that study and to try to get to the bottom of what really is at work.
Well, I'm looking forward to the final episode next week, and the next season next year. I guess it would come out. Yeah, should be interesting.
It will be interesting. I really appreciate your interest in this topic, and I appreciate all those online that have added their enthusiasm. It's fun to see discussion erupt around these topics, and I think that's one of the reasons why I agreed to this investigative series and this television program, is I felt like this was an opportunity to give people the chance to see the property, to actually accompany the team, and I think we're missing that in this field of inquiry. I mean, how long have you been at this? How long have you been investigating claims of this nature?
Like over 16 years now, I think.
Okay, so in all of your years, I mean, have you seen anything of this magnitude brought forward in a public fashion, yes, transparently?
No, I mean, it's certainly in terms of like supernatural type things. I suppose the only thing we would compare it to is the recent UFO video releases, which got a lot of attention, but there you didn't really have the degree of openness that you have. What you have here is kind of a strange blend, though. You have, on the one hand, you're very accessible in that you talk to people, and you're talking to me now. But on the other hand, we're seeing things through the lens of this show, which does appear to be very sensationalized and sometimes, kind of formulating a narrative at the expense of the actual, what actually went on. So it's great to have all this openness, but it's also a double-edged sword there, because you're presenting a lot of stuff which makes me more skeptical rather than less skeptical.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a no-win situation, though. Yeah, what is the perfect medium for really engaging public interest, stimulating discussion?
It would be Dropbox. You could just stick 2 terabytes of data on Dropbox, and I would point to me the ones that you think are the most interesting, and I'll have a look at them.
Yeah, for you, yes, but you're the anomaly. I think as far as the general public is concerned and whatnot, and trying to establish the right type of vehicle for disseminating information relative to these topics on the ranch, it's a challenge, and I've admitted that online. I mean, that has been part of the learning process that I've been going through over the course of the last year, especially the last 2 months as this program has aired. Is that it's very challenging when you're, on one hand, you're trying to convince people like you that are looking at it from a skeptical, purely data-driven and scientific-driven perspective, trying to make sure that we appropriately address your concerns, and that frankly, that which is presented is supported by the right type of data and media that would pass muster, that would frankly, I think, resolve your concerns, yet still be balanced with I guess what you would call the entertainment value, or
Yes.
the other functions that we're trying to let's
the
call it
History
education.
Channel.
Yeah,
The History Channel needs to make some money out of their show, so they
sure.
they need a certain degree of entertainment factor.
Sure. And what I would probably encourage, I'd encourage you to keep this in mind, and others that are tuning into this podcast, have fun with it. At times, we can take ourselves too seriously sometimes. I'm not saying that we should ever be cavalier when we're addressing such bold claims and topics, but I think at times, people need to have fun with it, and understand that this is it's not perfect, especially when you're dealing with television. Oh my goodness. It is not sorry, my battery was going dead there for a minute. It's not necessarily a perfect medium for introducing scientific topics to the public.
Yeah.
I mean, Carl Sagan did a masterful job with Cosmos.
Yes.
And I'll be the first to admit that this ain't Cosmos. This is this is an adventure. And I want it to be fun. I want it to be fun for people, and of course, I want this to be interesting, and we hope that people follow our journey, and that they're similarly inspired, and that their imaginations and that their interest is captured through all of this. I'm looking forward to continuing the journey with everyone. This is my journey. So, I started off on this path over 4 years ago, truly as a skeptic. You've seen, I wasn't someone who was in the domain. I wasn't participating in the UFO community in any way, and wasn't engaging people relative to these topics. And I surprisingly ended up being swept up in this effort as a result of my own experience with other witnesses. And if I wouldn't have had multiple witnesses with me on that fateful day and those events, that fateful day of events that I related to you earlier on this podcast, if I wouldn't have had those witnesses with me, coupled with all of the other events that occurred that were unusual, I don't know that, in retrospect, it would be very easy to dismiss, those things as well. Maybe maybe I'd somehow tricked myself into thinking that I was seeing something, but it's very difficult to trick for a whole host of witnesses from different backgrounds that are not part of the same fraternity, if you will, to all weigh in on it and have the exact same experience, and those to be coupled with all of these other events. So I really appreciate your invitation to come on. I'll restate my invitation that you're welcome to come out to the ranch and accompany Dragon on his patrol of the ranch if you wish in the future. I probably should say this, since this is in a public forum and you're going to be publishing this, which is the idea, because this is an active scientific investigation, and we're trying to maintain certain protocols and security and maintain the integrity of that investigation, which is ongoing. We really don't have the ability to open this up to the public. I do not have any intention. I have zero intention of ever opening this up to the public for tours, making some type of tourist attraction out of it. For one, I truly believe that there's danger. People have been hurt. we've had a number of people that have unfortunately ended up in the hospital with unexplained illnesses, I believe as a result of some of the activities and their engagement on the ranch. And we take that very seriously. And that's a part of our investigation. We're trying to get to the bottom of what is really at work, to answer some of those questions. So anyhow,
yeah,
thank you.
Well, I want to thank you very much for sharing your story and your experiences and what you're going to do in the future. And I look forward to seeing what happens in the future. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, and thank you for the dialogue. It's great.
Okay, and you have a good weekend.
Hey, you too. Enjoy and stay in touch. Feel free. I look forward to continuing our dialogue in the future.
Indeed. Okay. Thank you a lot.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.